Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm one of your regular hosts, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing?
I am filled with neurotic irresponsibility. How are you?
I'm great. I'm flying through space as an erotic sort of sex kitten.
That's going to be your byline from now on. You know, Scott Weatherly, sex kitten.
Yeah. I'm going to put it on a card. Put it on LinkedIn. That's what I think I'll do. Put it on my LinkedIn. We have done up until this season so far, and we sort of mentioned it last episode, but we've done Godzilla, and we talked about the impacts of the Second World War, nuclear annihilation, and how it had the impact on Japanese culture. And then we went and we talked about Quatermass in the Pit, and we talked about Lovecraftian horror and intergalactic sort of the seeding of a race and all this other stuff, and got quite deep on that sort of thing. This week we're gone. The dial has swung the other way, and we are talking the height of 60s sort of erotic kitsch, with an incredibly what I would say is people know of this film more than they know the film. We're going to be talking about Barbarella from 1968, starring Jane Fonda. And that's pretty much all you need to know about it.
You don't want to do the plot summary?
As I said, I tried to sort of like jot one down, and I was like, the more detail you go into, the less sense the plot summary made. So I don't even know what her job is in this film, but basically she's Barbarella is some sort of agent. I think she's an intergalactic dominatrix, is what they call her.
Yeah, well, they don't. It's like it's not dominatrix. It's like astro navigatrix.
Right.
So it has the tricks thing at the end, but I think she's like an astro navigator or something.
And she is sent on a mission to find a scientist called Duran, who is inventing a weapon. But they appear to have sort of evolved past all forms of conflict for thousands of years. So she's a bit confused by that. But that's her mission. She ends up going to planets and eventually the planet of Sogo, and meeting sort of all a cast of characters before finally confronting Duran and literally flying away from an exploding city as the sort of film ends and stuff. So we will get into the wheres and whyfalls of it. But really, let's get to the point. Where did you first come across this film, then, Julian?
Much like you were saying, I was aware of this movie for like a couple decades before I saw it. I did not see it until probably like 10 years ago. And I had seen clips of it, but it was something that like everybody referenced. The American movie poster that was like Barbarella, Queen of the Galaxy, like Jane Fonda, standing scantily clad with a kind of like Star Wars-y sort of like melange of elements behind her. That you knew that poster growing up. I mean, people would make Barbarella references in, pop culture, in comedies, anytime somebody was like a, sort of space woman that was sexualized at all. Somebody would say like, oh, you're dressing up as Barbarella, or something like that. But nobody watched the movie. Yeah, there you go. But Barbarella, Queen of the Galaxy. I mean, it's iconic, but it's more iconic for like, and we'll get into this in the film, but like it's more iconic for the idea of what it was doing, of sort of like the space vixen than for any elements of the plot. And, you mentioned Duran Duran, like the band is named after Duran Duran. There's although I think officially Duran Duran has a D at the end. And so the band was like, well, it sounds like Duran Duran, and they didn't have a transcript. But, there's like unbelievable influence to this film, but nobody's watched it, or lots of people watched it, but more people have been influenced than watched it. So what about you?
Yeah, it's a very similar thing. I haven't watched this in a long, long time. I've watched it probably once before, since watching it again for this recording, and that was at university. And I do think, like you said, it was always the poster. It's one of those sort of the posters. It's the cover that's now on the Blu-ray. It's that sort of like the iconic thing of, you know, Jane Fonda's scantily clad, holding the rifle and all this other stuff. And it's up there with sort of like that Raquel Welch sort of 1 million years BC kind of thing. Like everyone knows the poster. Everyone knows that she's in sort of the fur skin bikini. Very few people have actually seen the film. And I remember sort of seeing I can actually remember when I was at university, they had the poster there at Freshers Week because everyone's putting stuff up for their walls and sort of stuff. And I remember just thinking like that time, thinking, oh, that's one of the films I really should see. And just being able to pick it up on DVD or something at one point whilst I was at university, and then being like, right, we've got to watch this. Watching it and thinking then, this is odd, and I'm not sure what to make of this. And then never going back to it. And I don't still have that DVD, so I must have passed it on. And it being that thing of it just exists in pop culture as an entity rather than a film that people sort of actually go back and watch, which I do find is quite bizarre. But also, I sort of understand why.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we were talking a little before the show about, you know, sort of the response to it, and I think it's easy to kind of like brush it off. But I think that, you know, I love this movie. You know, I think that one of the reasons why I was not eager to see it is I just thought, like, I got it. You know, there's a woman who's scantily clad with a ray gun, and like that's an awesome aesthetic. But like, what more do I need to know, right? And nobody ever talked about the plot. I actually think the plot is quite interesting, although nonsensical. You know, but you know, the truth is, like the plot of, you know, Star Wars is nonsensical. The plot of Flash Gordon is nonsensical. I mean, I don't know that this is that much more nonsensical, but it is more whimsical. It's got this wonderful sense of whimsy to it. And I feel like it's, you know, it's about things I love. For me, every time I go back and watch this, my initial impression, okay, it starts with the like, sort of like most famous sort of striptease scene that she's getting out of her spacesuit. And it's obviously shot like with a camera overhead against, you know, with her on a plane of glass. But it's really well done for the time. And, you know, it sort of announces what it's doing. But then every time I watch this, I'm amazed by like how much I do not like everything that follows for about 40 minutes. And, you know, I mean, there's stuff I like. There's stuff we'll talk about that I think is really praiseworthy and interesting. But for me, it's really like once they go to Sogo, they're in the city. Every set I love. Every set is like totally bizarre. There's, you know, like this culture is totally alien and weird. Like the dialogue is all like suggestive and, you know, like and suggestive in the best sense, not just like a sexual innuendo, but suggestive in the sense of like, does that mean something in this culture, or are they weird, or is that a joke? Like, you know, it's just so weird. I love how weird this movie is. It
does go to, I mean, like I say, when they get to Sogo, when they get to the sort of the final third of the film, like there is some really interesting ideas about. That's it, and they also they have really interesting ideas that just get moved on. They're like, here's something fascinating, move on. It's just sort of thrown away. And there's a couple of those which I'll bring up, which I thought were really good. But no, you're right. I find the first 10 minutes in particular, like, I mean, you couldn't do it today. Firstly, the striptease is you know, to be fair, it's well done. It feels very 60s. It covers the sort of the film credits, the titles as they go through. And then she's just in her spaceship, which basically is clad not just sort of floor to ceiling, but like 360 degrees in sort of shag carpet. Like it's incredibly sort of like of the time. But then when she's given her mission, and there's this whole conversation with her and the president of Earth, and she's sort of playing this sort of naive. And this is the thing I struggle with this whole character. Is like she's given a mission. She's clearly sort of been chosen for this mission because it seems like an incredibly important mission. And I wouldn't say she's stupid, but she's playing it like almost like ditzy and naive and all this other stuff. And I'm sort of like, why was she chosen? Like, if she's been chosen, like, what else? Who else was available to do this? And it's one of those things that in these films, you are given a reason as to why the protagonist is special, why they're the only one that can do this mission or whatever, or why they were chosen or whatever, for whatever reason. Like, there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason as to why she was the one chosen to do this. And then you get 10 minutes of her traveling through space, and it's just sort of like some psychedelic images up on her screen.
Yeah.
And it goes on for quite some time. And I was going back and watching this, I was a bit like, I hope this moves on soon, because this is 10 minutes in and it's already dragging. But yeah, it starts to pick up then. I mean, what are your thoughts on sort of that? On that, why Barbarella?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, and I don't know that it matters. I mean, I think that Flash Gordon is like, I'm a football player. Why can't they lead a revolution? Why do you need this idiot? I mean, Barbarella. I mean, I think the idea is, I do kind of like that conversation with the president. He's the president of Earth, and the idea is like, they're in this time of peace, and when the president of Earth first says, like, Duran is working on this weapon, she's like, what? Neurotic irresponsibility? Like, who wants conquest anymore? This is just such a foreign concept to them. And it's kind of, Roddenberry Star Trek in that way. It's very utopian. It's like, yeah, there are parts of space we don't really know, but basically all of space that's colonized is totally civilized. And the other thing is, she has that conversation with him in the nude. So she's taking off those. And so, I mean, which obviously it's, exploitative, it's sexploitation, but it also, there's no reference to it.
No,
there's just no sense of shame. It's just like, yeah, this is my body. And I think that, the idea is that she's an astronavigator, and I guess there aren't a lot of those. And I think what distinguishes her is she does seem, I don't think she's stupid. I think that she's obviously very, skilled at what she does. I think that she is, she's respected by the president. Like, the president knows her. Clearly they've talked multiple times, and he sort of says, like, I look forward to meeting you in person someday, and it's sort of, there's a, suggestiveness to that. But, obviously he knows her, he respects her. She's out there flying around, and it seems like what makes her so unique is she's lucky, but she's also, like, totally courageous, totally, like, through the whole movie, every time they're like, well, you can't do that. Like, how are we going to do that? Nobody's ever done that. She's just like, well, we could do this. Let's do it. Just there's this just kind of like American can-do spirit, to her, that just never thought anything was impossible. And I think that's the closest I can get to.
No, I agree with that. I'd almost describe it like a peppiness. Like, she's just constantly chirpy, and like I said, she does. She takes on every challenge. Like, she never gives in. I mean, I would definitely say that. Like, at no point does she back down. Like, she is the forward momentum throughout the entire film. Every time they hit a blocker or like an obstacle, she's just like, well, we'll do this, and so. But she's not like Mary Sue about it. Like, she doesn't always succeed, but she's always driving the thing forward. Yeah, no, I suppose that's true. I mean, it's like you say, it's interesting to say you say she's skilled. She still does crash land, and I mean, actually, one of the things I find most interesting though is, like, say, you say about this idea of conflict. One of the things that sort of he sends her and says, look, if you're going to go up against this person that's building a weapon, you are going to need weapons. And so he sends her these sort of futuristic looking ray guns and stuff, but they're from a museum.
Yeah,
and because they're like, oh, we don't have these anymore. we've sort of had to go and raid the archives to get you these guns. And she's sort of holding them. She's a bit like, right, well, all right, well, I've got guns now, I suppose. And I do like that the sort of, you know, that's not the sort of the go-to anymore. It's sort of like, well, we travel around and we'd see things, but yeah, it's never been. I don't have a gun. It definitely is a more optimistic. It definitely taps into that sort of, I wouldn't say hippie-ish because it's definitely hippie, but it taps into the positivity of the 60s.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, and again, like, he respects her. I love the fact that she, you know, that she doesn't put clothes on. You know, like, oh, the president is calling me. Well, whatever, I'm gonna take the call. You know, like, you know, there's no, like, I mean, you know, we're all you know, making recordings at home on COVID, and we're worried about, like, you know, do I do that in my sweatpants? You know, like, do I wipe the mucus off my shirt? You know, that kind of thing. And, you know, here Barbarella's just like, this is who I am. I'm not embarrassed by it. And the other thing is, you know, you're right about the museum thing. I love that. There's a loot of, like, it's almost this, you know, Vulcan-esque thing, but they don't split the fingers. The way they sign on and off is by holding up their hands and saying love. What the fuck, man? Like yeah. This is so utopian. I love it though.
No, you're right, because I think of love in sort of, there's two things really I think is all through this, because eventually we'll get to him, but the character of Pygar, who I'm never entirely sure if he is actually an angel or not, because it's never quite explained, but he does say throughout it, because he suggests that he slept with Pygar, that slept with Barbarella, but he says in it that, well, angels don't make love, they are love. So there is real positivity throughout this film. It's supposed to be about non-conflict. I mean, it's literally about good versus, like, ultimate evil, really. But yeah, no.
Well,
Barbara, go on.
Yeah, you say good versus evil, but I mean, you know, that's true. But I think that, you know, not to, like, you know, fluff up this film too much, but I mean, it's fundamentally about, you know, this vision of the universe of Barbarella as wonderfully innocent, despite, you know, having sex with multiple people. The only person who ever says anything about shame is Duran Duran, the villain. But, you know, that vision of the world versus a vision of control and repression. And Duran Duran not only wants to conquer, you know, I mean, that city is evil and, you know, it's ruled by a tyrant, but Duran Duran wants to conquer it and he wants to build a gun. But it's like this masculine idea of conquest and control. And other than that, there's no sense of conquest and control. You know, the vision of the world that Barbarella comes from is one in which, who cares who you have sex with? You know, who cares? You know, if you're nude talking to the president, the idea of that kind of masculine force of control and conquest seems to be utterly unknown.
Yeah, I mean, being naked and talking to the president in 2020, that has whole different connotations at the moment. But it's very true. But one of the things I also noticed in this film, at no point, apart from sort of her being beautiful and sort of it being around sort of sex and stuff, and again, they don't refer to it as lovemaking, her being a female warrior is never questioned. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, at no point is like, but you're a woman, sort of thing, which would, you know, would have been amazing. It's not even a thing. Oh, it's just Barbarella's here and she's going to sort of take them on. Like, it's just a part and parcel of it. And I love that again, like, it's just, you know, who she is. It's just, she's just there as a character. One of the things I will throw out, because again, you said about this thing that's influenced future films. And we've talked obviously about the sex and stuff that's in it. There's also this notion of, it's sort of alluded to until it's finally explained, which is weird because it's almost like the wrong way around. But it's explained at one point that physical sexual contact is no longer a thing in the universe, and they have this drug, and they touch hands, and it's sort of like a psychosexual thing. And all I can think of is Demolition Man has clearly taken from this film. Which I thought was really weird. I was like, that's a really weird reference. I'm now thinking about a Sylvester Stallone action film from the 90s, but, you know, there you go. But yeah, no, there's this whole thing and I'm going to just drop this idea now because it sort of struck me after watching the film. Is she's a naive character, should I say? She's not ashamed of her body or her sexuality in any real way. But when she crashes onto the planet, and she's attacked by these kids and these dolls, which I'm not entirely. The only thing I can think of that exists solely for her to be rescued by the beardy, hairy guy. That's it.
Mark Hand, yeah.
Yeah, and so sort of like his purpose in the film is to introduce her to physical sex. Because she says it, he sort of saves her, takes her into this little cabin thing, which is his boat. Which, to be fair, again, the sets on the ice planet are crap, but the design for that sort of ice skimming boat thing is actually really cool.
Yeah,
it's literally like a little log cabin with sails. I was like, that's really cool.
Yeah, with this weird like seashell kind of like translucent front to it. And the sails, like, they're connected at various points, but it's not like a solid line. Like, yeah, I mean, the design in this movie, I think, is fantastic. And as you say, like the icy area, it's embarrassing. I mean, it is, that's part of where, like with the sort of magnetic storm that goes on, and the dolls, I mean, there's a lot of stuff early on that just does not look great and doesn't feel great to watch.
It looks OG. It looks OG Star Trek. I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah, the worst of Star Trek.
Yeah. But the thing I find interesting was, I mean, he says to her, like, for having rescued her, she says, what do you want? He says, I want to have sex with you. I want to make love to you. And she's sort of like, oh, okay, well, I've got one of the drugs here somewhere, and sort of thing. And he's like, no, not that way. The real way. I want to, proper sort of intercourse. And she's sort of like, oh, well, we don't do that anymore, really. I mean, it seems a bit pointless. It's really inefficient, isn't it? And she sort of gives in incredibly quickly. And then it sort of cuts to the next thing, and she's obviously now experienced this sort of physical thing, and it's changed her, because now all of a sudden she's very open to it. But what I thought was really interesting is it could have been anyone, but he's almost like a caricature of manliness. She's obviously very, very feminine. She's wearing sort of very sort of I wouldn't say wholly revealing, but very sort of suggestive clothing. It's very well designed. I mean, the thing is, the costumes in this are great. Like, they're amazing. But he is literally wearing a hairsuit.
Yeah.
And he's got like a big beard, and he is sort of like the manliest man they could find without being a lumberjack for this film. And it's just interesting that he is the one that introduces her to like physical sensation. And I was like, is that meant to be? Is that like a 60s thing? Is that sort of like, I don't know, but it just felt like a very intentional choice.
Yeah, I mean, I kept thinking of, Sean Connery in that role,
Yes.
I mean, it's so Sean Connery, like, I prefer the old-fashioned way,
Yes. Yeah.
You can totally see Connery in that role. Yeah, no, I mean, I know what you're saying, and I think that, I mean, ultimately, I'm sure we'll have this discussion and keep coming back to this about like how to understand this film and understand this character and this plot in terms of feminism and the development of feminism. And there's no doubt that, that is one of the more problematic elements, right? Like, on the one hand, I think the way she yields to him and says, oh, well, so it's problematic that sex is a reward. Like, you've rescued me, I want to do something. But when he's like, well, I'd like to have sex with you, she doesn't bat an eyelash. She's like, well, that seems barbaric to do it this old-fashioned way, but, I'm not saying that isn't problematic, and you're right that it's problematic that he's like, the most, by far, the most sort of like ultra-masculine figure. But and then that he kind of like initiates her, and she's sort of singing, and that's a cliche, but I think it's done pretty well. But yeah, I mean, I think those elements are problematic, but I also think like the way she is just like, oh, well, that's fine. There's no like, I'm not that type of girl. That's clearly not a thought that's ever occurred to her. The idea that she's somehow tainted or, a slut or any of this, like that does not exist. And even at the end, like the this, monstrosity sort of spits her out and sort of does it because she's so innocent. Well, she slept with like two guys, and the movie is like, no, you are majestically innocent. So much so that like the universe responds to your innocence, and that innocence exists utterly independent of how many sexual partners you've had. And so I think that, yeah, she yields to him, and there is this kind of like initiation into sex that is problematic there. But on the other hand, she is utterly innocent about it. She's not hung up. And, and here we get into like, issues of feminism and issues of the time. This is the 60s. And, in the 60s, like we shouldn't pretend that like the hippie countercultural movement wasn't sexist. It absolutely was. Not everybody was having sex with everybody. And you read these firsthand accounts and it's like, yeah, there were a lot of guys macking on girls in, not nice ways. But at the same time, this was the era of like obscenity trials and, Grove Press defending great classic literature, and Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn and stuff. And, so, at the time, basically presenting sex in any kind of positive way, any way that wasn't just shameful, was itself a kind of radical political act. And I think, today, as we continue to have these discussions and we look back on this film, I think it's, despite those problematic elements, I think it stands up remarkably well. And there's a kind of, for me, I mean, we're two guys having this discussion, right? Mm-hmm. But in talking with, my friends who are feminists, we often delineate between, or they often delineate their sex positive feminism from the sort of more problematic feminism that I, more militant sort of stuff that I have had a problem with at times. And I think that this is like that sex positive strain of feminism runs right through Barbarella. Barbarella is just a wonderful example for me of, a good kind of feminism that hopefully we will continue to move into.
I would definitely agree with that. I totally agree. The sort of, like I say, the sex positivity is, like you say, runs throughout it. And again, because it never comes across, like I say, as being seedy or even the fact itself, like, you've had the striptease at the beginning, and then so to transition to her sort of sleeping with this sort of, like I say, this ultra masculine looking guy, but it never feels in the film, it never feels that they don't exploit it. It's not sort of, like I say, sexploitation. There's no sort of like, bow, chicka, wow, wow, and sort of like, do you know what I mean? Though it transitions to the next scene. It's just her humming and singing and sort of like, well, that was a lovely experience. And he's sort of like, okay, well, actually, I could probably fix your ship for you. And even when they part, it's that sort of like, there's an expectation. She's like, oh, are you coming with me then? And he's like, no, I'm here. This is where I sort of live, and this is where I'm used to. So I'm going to stay. And it's nice. And she's like, okay, well, thank you very much for your help and everything. And, she's obviously been quite affected by this moment because she's sort of a bit dazed. But at no point is it played like for seediness or sort of for cheap sexual sort of like thrills, which I was a little surprised about, because it's like you say, sex positivity is what it is. But like you say, that whole sort of first act of that, it sort of gets to that point, and I'm like, well, that was pointless. And then sort of it throws it, like you said, episodic is definitely what you mentioned before. Sort of, it throws you into that next bit. Because he's, and this bit you may have to explain to me a bit, because I may have blinked. But like he's basically connected up her ship backwards. So instead of going out into space, she is jettisoned through the planet.
Yeah, I don't really understand that. I mean, I think like he fixes her ship and it takes off, but I mean, it seems like then it has some kind of like failure and it crashes, and it seems to like crash through the ice, and then they're just like in another area. I don't understand that.
at first I was like, oh, this must be like an underground, area, and then I was like, oh no, there's a sky, and there's a planet. So I legitimately thought like maybe I must have looked away for something, but I checked and I couldn't find anything. So okay, good. I'm glad you were just as confused as me.
No, I mean that doesn't make sense.
No, but it does. It's literally like an episodic transition because she now goes to the second half of the film, which is where she goes to, I suppose, like the city of like Sogor, and there's this sort of, she's in this maze or ruins. It's more like a ruin, isn't it, of an old city or something?
Yeah, they call it the labyrinth. Now, I do want to say, like, I definitely feel like that early stuff when she lands and then she like meets these kids, and it's like all these kids are twins and they have these dolls that have sharp teeth and they attack her and bite her, and I mean, it's interesting. Like it's like kind of, why are they all twins? And then Sean Connery comes up and Mark Hand and says he's a catchman, and it seems as if they say like the area is called Weir, and he captures children when they're old enough and then turns them in, right? So, and then she has sex with him, and then they go to this labyrinth, and the labyrinth is like in the outskirts of the city, right? That's like the capital city where the tyrant lives. So I think that going through it, like basically there's no point to the kid stuff. There's no point to the doll stuff. There's no point to, the Mark Weir. And, I mean, I like a lot of these design elements. I actually like the design of the ship. The ship is very feminine, and you'd not confuse it for a rocket ship. Even inside, like, you're right, the shag carpeting is weird, but like, there's like a keyboard control center. Yeah. Like, I mean, everything is just weird. And I love how just weird and organic it is in this weird way. But so there's stuff like that I like in that element, in that section, and even in this labyrinth section, but I don't think it's good. But as far as plot, there is this kind of, not to pump it up too much, but there is this kind of like Heart of Darkness, sort of like getting closer and closer to the city. And while you're doing that, you're seeing different aspects of the culture, right? So like, I know like I'm making this seem like it's, classic literature, right? But like those twins are like, oh, this is where the kids are, and they live like barbarians, and Mark Hand is like this barbarian, and and those twins are creepy, and they basically have no adult supervision. But then when they get old enough, the catchman, right, like takes them over to like the city, and the labyrinth is like on the suburbs where like the rejected people are, and they can never leave the labyrinth. And, and then you eventually get to the city. So you have these like concentric rings of sort of like distance from the empire center, if you will, and I think that's a really cool structure, even though I don't like most of the stuff until you get to the city.
No, I see what you're saying. And maybe I would have seen that more if more happened. Like, because she goes, like I say, from the outside of the planet to this other thing, and then like gets into the city relatively easily. If there was like almost like just one more section of like, okay, here's another place, like you say, that would be a questing journey, like that she's gone through all these things. Maybe, yeah. I can see what you're saying. I mean, this film isn't long; it's 98 minutes, sort of thing, so it's quite sort of concise. And of that, I think 10 minutes is taken up with the striptease at the beginning. So. I can see what you're saying, but still.
Can we just mandate a 10-minute striptease in all movies, to add to the runtime?
Just pick there's certain people who are ever going to be in the film. Just one of them has to do it. A sort of.
I mean, I look, to be honest about it, to be gender equal. If we're going to do a Captain America movie, everybody loves Chris Evans. Chris Evans has to do striptease. I think he'd be up for it, to be perfectly honest. Him and Chris Pratt would probably have like a striptease off. I'm pretty sure they'd. I think Chris Pratt would say God would object.
Yeah, maybe. They did it for charity. I think they might do it for the right reasons. But yeah, no. The thing with it goes to this next point, and again, this is where it sort of throws in ideas that it's not that they don't go anywhere, but their ideas that a bit like the rest said at the beginning. It's almost like, here's an idea. I'm not going to explain any more about it. We're just going to sort of move on. Because these people that live in this labyrinth, like, you literally meet a guy with massive wings. I have to admit, the wing effects and the sort of style of it look great.
Yeah,
like they look really cool. Pygar as an angel looks really cool. And you meet, like, Marceau. Marceau is Professor Ping. Who, again, you're sort of like, well, what are you doing here? Like, why have you got a French mime as an actor in this? All right. And there's other characters, and they're introducing this, because they sort of pan through this labyrinth, and there are people that have been sort of like combined with the rock.
Yeah.
There are people sort of going along, and they've got like cobwebs sort of draped all over them. There's one point, there's someone in the background crying. There's like stuff going on. I'm like, what is this? This is like this has gone a very different tone. And when they get Professor Ping explaining it at one point, I mean, it's not a great effect, but they have a guy turn round and he's fading. Like, he has his head, and you see someone walking up some stairs behind him. It's like a projection, like a green screen effect. It hasn't really worked, but it would look good for the time, I suppose. But you see this guy behind him, and he literally says, that's just him fading from existence. And you're sort of like, whoa, stop, wait a minute. What? This person's fading from existence. Yes, and that's it. All right.
Okay.
All right.
Wow. How is that happening?
Yeah. Why? I don't really understand what's
important.
going on. Yeah. And but it's almost like there is a wider world here. There is something going on. But it's almost like it's not important to an extent. And I just sort of kind of like that they sort of, but yeah, that whole section of going through the labyrinth is bizarre in one of the best possible ways.
Well, I mean, so here's what I'd say about that. Like, I love what you're saying. I totally agree with it. I mean, I think that labyrinth, like, it always reminds me of like a Greek Hades, right? Where people are shades, and they're wandering around and they don't really remember their former life. There's that kind of like, it always reminds me of that. And obviously, like, the labyrinth is sort of Greek, it's mythological. Then there's this angel thrown in, which is sort of, Judeo-Christian. It's very bizarre. It's very symbolically resonant. I mean, the people like fused with a rock is so creepy. Those kind of, you point out those spider webs and, that guy fading. I mean, it all sort of is symbolically resonant and cool, but you're right that, like, there's no real attempt to explain in any coherent way how this civilization works, right? Like, why do you have twin kids? Do you exile? Like, there's no children in the city. Do they, or in the labyrinth? Do they, like, how do they have kids? First of all, then they exile the kids, like, to the outskirts where they're like living in Thundar the Barbarian.
Yeah.
And, and then when they get old enough, there's like a guy who wears, furs, who goes around and like catches them in nets and takes them to the city. And then if you piss off the city, we put you in this like labyrinth where you start fading away and you become like shades and you lose confidence and, your sense of self. All of that is like massively symbolically resonant, and there are great ideas there. But none of it really makes sense coherently as a coherent world. On the other hand, we've discussed so many movies where that's my complaint. Where I'm like, Flash Gordon makes no sense whatsoever as a coherent world, right? I mean, half of Star Wars just doesn't even attempt to have a coherent world, right? Well, how are you farming moisture, right? No, doesn't mind. It's an idea. Yeah. How does this economy really work with what doesn't matter, right? It's just an idea. It's enough of a gesture towards it. And okay, that's a fuller gesture than this is doing. But I kind of like the sort of like French absurdity of there's a kind of like surrealism to this that there is in a different way to like Flash Gordon, but Flash Gordon is a kind of like American absurdity, and this is a kind of like more French surrealist absurdity.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, Flash Gordon sort of cleanly fits into that sort of like, the white savior sort of like, motif. This sort of fits more into the like I haven't got a clue what's going on motif a lot of the time. I mean, again, it comes to things like you meet Pygar, this angel, who at one point it sort of alluded to the fact that he is a native of this place. Like it's sort of, which I'm not entirely sure if that's the truth or not. He's blind because and again, I'm like, does that mean anything? No, he literally had an accident and was blinded. I'm like, okay, so that's not really relevant to anything. It plays into the plot a bit. And then it's sort of suggested again, it's all suggestive. She's sort of like looking at him appreciatively. You know, he's obviously very lithe and he's very athletic and this sort of thing. And he takes her up to his nest, which I'm sort of like, I know he's got bird wings, but he's not a bird. Like that's weird.
Yes.
And then like it's unclear whether or not they've slept together. But it seems quite clear because, you know, people start looking up and he's flying around and Professor Ping, sort of Marceau sort of says, oh, my God, look at that. Finally, which sort of goes, oh, so he couldn't do that before? Like, you didn't say that a minute ago.
No, they did. They do. Okay, so they do say, like, that he can't fly. And she asks the professor about it, and Ping says, like, it's in his mind, right? That it's like it's psychological. And you know, like again, I think like the nest thing is just one of those like weird Flash Gordon like crazy ideas that you just put in without a filter. I had the same response, right? Yeah. You know, why do you live in a nest? You know, yeah. But, you know, I like that he's blind. Like, you know, that is sort of symbolically resonant, especially with, you know, the sort of motif that the blind figure going back to Homer can see. Right. But, yeah, I mean, it is said that, like, you know, he can't fly anymore. And it seems because he's like down on himself. He's blind. He doesn't believe in himself. And Ping says, like, oh, that's psychological. And then she sleeps with him in his nest, and the way you know they've had sex is it's not as clear as the you know Sean Connery dude, but you know you cut to her reclining and singing just like you know with the hunter guy, and you know it's like, oh, you know, like she's starting to enjoy this now. She's okay with the old ways, and then suddenly he starts flying, and Ping sees him flying and says, interesting therapy.
Yeah, it's true. Like she's laying in the nest and sort of strategically placed grass, you know, all over. And yeah, it's sort of, again, it's almost like, for her, this is going to sound awful, because it's not that she's being slutty. It's like she's clearly enjoying the physical experience now. Because there's a third encounter, which I think is quite... Because the other thing is, humour starts to be introduced at this point. Up until now, like, it's been a little bit unclear about the tone that it's trying to strike. Mm-hmm. And it comes in later on. There are moments that are almost like slapstick level humour that I'm like, okay, it's quite funny, but I'm sort of like, it doesn't fit with other parts of this film. But yeah, it's clear that she is now getting quite into the groove of this sort of like this physical lovemaking, where she's like, "Oh, okay, great. Well, he's an angel, and you know, I'm all for that." And it just sort of seems sort of like, again, it's not a big deal. It's just sort of another encounter, and actually, it's had, as you say, it's had another positive outcome.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not looked down upon. It's not a sort of like a you know, oh God, she's only just slept with the other woman. I don't know what the time passing is, but she's been busy. But it has another positive impact, or another outcome. So again, sort of quite sex positive, really, I suppose.
Yeah, and you know, going back to like the hunter, when they're just like, oh, we're going our separate ways. I remember like the first time I saw this, you know, even relatively recently, it was just shocking to me. I mean, it's just like, you know, it's shocking to me that there's not that like painful goodbye. Like, you know, it's just like, well, you know, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to do this. Like, we like each other. That was really awesome. I hope to see you again. You know, it's like, there's no like lingering, like, oh, shouldn't we talk about being in a relationship. Like, there's no aspect of that. And the same thing with that angel. It's like, you know, there's no feeling on the movie's part whatsoever that this is that of judgment of her. It's positive to him. And again, I think like there's a kind of problematic aspect in that both, the hunter sort of initiates her, and then, that's a reward for him. She enjoys it, but then the second time it's like therapeutic for him. I'm not saying this isn't problematic at all, but I love that. There's no shaming, and there's this sense of like, she is beautiful. That angel is beautiful, let's have sex, and like, maybe that'll help your confidence issues, dude. And this is going to be fun for me too.
Yeah, it is. It's as straightforward as that. I mean, it's not. I mean, we've spoken relatively recently about sort of when we did our Red Dwarf thing. You go back to the series 5 episode Hollow Ship, and where it's sort of mandatory to sort of have sex at least once a day, or in their sort of almost as a sporting event. It's not quite that far, but they say it's not this sort of like entrenched in all the emotions and the relationship that I think sort of like gets layered onto it now in many, many respects. So yeah, it's almost we've talked about it quite a bit, but it's almost like a footnote in the film. It just sort of happens, and the film sort of goes, right, well, we're moving on to the next bit. And she's like, well, I've got to get into that city. And this is where you sort of get the explanation of like how, to an extent, of how things work. This sort of boggles my brain a bit, because I was constantly wondering, like, why would you live here? Like, why would you live on this planet? Like, there's clearly intergalactic travel. Why here? So this city is powered by a watery mass that exists. What do they call it? I forgot what they call it, but it's a
Mathmos.
Mathmos, there you go. So yeah, it's a watery mass that exists across or under the planet, and it feeds off. And I'm going to make another film reference, which I couldn't believe I was thinking about when watching this film. But of negative vibes and evil sort of fuels it, and it then in return gives them energy and warmth and and to the extent of like people are fed to it and all this other stuff. And again, I was thinking, so it's basically a psychosomatic gooey substance that lives under the city and has been driven by negative vibes. Dan Aykroyd has watched Barbarella and put it into Ghostbusters 2.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about Solaris, with that sort of like planet surface that is somehow psychoactive. And you sort of see the Mathmos underneath. I mean, okay, so once they get, like as they're flying to the city, you have those weird like flying contraptions, and they're the weirdest design. It's like there's two pods and they're kind of conical on top, and they've got wings, but their wings are like these convex shapes.
Yeah.
So like, okay, that's cool. Then they get into the city and you're introduced, like, I love this Mathmos idea. I think it's just underneath the city, because it like explodes at the end and it destroys the city and maybe some of the surrounding labyrinth. But I don't know that it's the whole planet. You might be right. But I love, like, you see it through this like translucent floor, and it's like this city has been built on top of this unfathomable alien consciousness. It's the trippiest shit imaginable, right?
Yeah.
But it's visually awesome.
It is. I'll say, because there's a scene, and they go through the city a little bit, and you see that you are told that the people that live in the city have to be evil in order to sort of continue to sort of feed Mathmos in order for it to give them warmth and heat and food and all this other stuff, whatever. And so that's sort of how they live. But more than that, they get sort of the angel gets captured, and sort of so Barbarella has to save him. And again, at no point is she ever really just the sort of like the damsel in distress. Like, she does a lot of the saving, which is cool. But she sort of saves the angel, and they back up into a chamber which has got 3 doors on it. And a voice comes over and it's basically sort of like, and you see it through this way. You see Massimo's through the floor, and it's like this bubbling grey mass, and it changes color and stuff. It is really cool. But you are given sort of 3 options for death, and I was sort of thinking, like, I was trying to grasp what this was about, and it felt to me, it's like this chamber. If you've had enough of living in this city, it's almost like this is a suicide chamber.
Absolutely,
I can't live this way anymore. But I love the fact it gives you 3 options, 3 doors, and you see someone go through one, and there's just a screaming and stuff. And again, I was like, this is a really dark idea, but in a really sort of, like I say, like peppy, trippy film. This thought of like, I can't live in this evil city anymore. I'm going to have to kill myself. I was like, wow, that's going somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I for me, it's part of the trippiness, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, I wrote down in my notes, like, it's a suicide room. Like, it's like, the Futurama, like, suicide booths or something. But yeah, I mean, then you start getting into like the design of the city. And for me, like, once you're in the city, everything picks up, and I basically love everything. Right away, like, they land in the city. The Angel's sort of captured. These men sort of attack and capture her. It's implied that they're going to rape her. A woman with an eye patch shows up, and kills them. Then there's like stairs inside this plastic tube, and suddenly you're at a wall with like these giant metal threads coming out of it. It's like, like this is some art installation, in a museum, postmodern museum or something. And then they stumble, they retreat into this suicide room with a Mathmos through the floor. And, and you think, so not only is like every element of design amazing and mind-bending, but then, like, I also am so intrigued by how does this society function? Like you're saying, like, clearly people get pissed off and done with it, and they're just like, oh, I'm going to go to that suicide room. But even that suicide room is like whimsical and bizarre. Like, if you're going to kill yourself, you should have 3 choices. Like, what's going on? And then it says, like, if you don't make a choice, we'll kill you unpleasantly in this other 4th way. It's very bizarre.
It is. It's sort of like, we've got these 3 terrible ways, or the 4th awful way. So make your choice. But you're right. I mean, because also, like I say, it's 2-tiered. This set is 2-tiered, and she goes up this like flight of stairs, which is great because it's like a perspex tube with stairs in. And it is all design, because there is no efficiency, or purpose to half the stuff there, which is fine. Yeah. And I'm completely happy with that, because it looks cool. And also it's all in keeping. Like, if it was sort of, filmed in an oil refinery kind of place, like they do in some of these sci-fi films, and then they had this perspex tube with stairs in, it would look really out of place. But no, the whole place is in keeping with that tone, and it does look really cool. And I can imagine whoever did the design for this, it looks very European. Like, I can imagine, sort of, because we should say, actually, the whole thing is based on a French comic, and so it does seem very in keeping with that aesthetic. And it goes to the costumes as well, because a lot of them are just sort of like, they've gone mad with the costuming. There's like feathers, places, there's chains, there's different colors and different things. I mean, when they are rescued by the guy called the concierge, and he walks in sort of like what is sort of a bit like a weird sort of Japanese kimono kind of deal, but it's got like almost like the front of a boat sticking out the front of it and stuff. I'm like, someone's had a real good time designing and making these costumes.
Yeah, I love that stuff. And then he walks them through this weird door that's like not rectangular, but it's not like, it doesn't even come all the way down to the floor, and it's not even like an oval. It's just this weird organic shape. And then, so many of these scenes, like, there are these like translucent corridors and stuff, and then the other thing is, like, the camera gets really aggressive. And you start getting all these shots like through translucent parts of the room, and I mean, there are so many shots in this that are just, I'm just like, that is a brilliant artistic shot. I can't believe that that's in this movie. It just seems to me that once they're in that city, like you said, the costumes, somebody went crazy on. These set designs, somebody went crazy on. And then like they walk into rooms and it's like, oh, there are people hanging. You know, like they're into BDSM, like they crucify the angel. There are people hanging. Like clearly there's like a sort of like BDSM subculture going on here. And then there's like, you know, people doing opium, and the opium is from like, there's a dude like in a giant kind of like flask, and it's
essence of man. That's what it's called.
Women are getting high on the essence of man that's being distilled from the dude, like half submerged in bubbling water. Like, it's so bizarre.
Yeah. And I love the fact that, again, sort of, I almost, watching it, one of the things that I noted was I almost feel like this film was filmed in a linear fashion, and they got more adventurous as they went on, because they get to the sort of the first shots of the city and filming through the city. They are not say they're standard. They look good, but there's a lot of wide shots, and then it comes in sort of like a middling shot and this sort of stuff. It's very sort of fixed camera, you know, it's fine. And then it's almost like you say, so the cinematographer or the director's gone, this set's amazing. Let's try this. Let's try that. And they do this, really start to include like the set design in the shots. Doesn't mean, you know, we do talk about there's several, and weirdly the wrong, like weird occasions. Like the end in the finale has got these like rotating, like magnifying glass lenses. Yeah, and that's really cool. And that sort of like feeds into the whole thing, and it looks good. But they also have a comedy scene at one point, and we'll talk about the rebels in a minute. But they have a comedy scene about a radio. They're trying to turn off a radio, but it's all shot down from the top of a perspex tube down to the two characters. I'm like, this shot's awesome. It's really, but it's a really sort of like silly, whimsical scene, but a really cool shot.
It reminds me of like Will Eisner Spirit Comics, where like the best stuff is just like, we're getting some weird worm's eye view, you know, like from between a sewer grate looking up at the characters. And you're like, why not? I mean, I think some of the best cinematographers are like, you know, hey, let's shoot through this lamp, you know, like, you know, let's shoot through the lampshade, you know, and people make fun of this, but I love those shots. And the lens shot you were talking about blows my mind. I think it's so amazing because the lenses are rotating. And so even more than through that tube, like you're watching the figures, but the figures are constantly being distorted and changing shape. And that seems so correct for this sort of whimsical, you know, incoherent sort of stream of consciousness story.
But it seems that the more they go on, the more adventurous they become with how they make this film. And I'm pretty sure if that's the case, I can imagine they're all sat at the end of this going, I wish we could film the beginning again. Like, so much cool stuff we could have done. But yeah, because I mean, you know, she does. You talked about the woman with the eye patch as well, who sort of basically tries to attack Barbarella, and Barbarella's like, "Nah, I'm all right, thanks. I'm sort of not bothered by that." And it turns out that the reveal is that she is the tyrant. What do they call her? The ultimate tyrant, or
they call her the Great Tyrant.
The Great,
and then
Tyrant.
Later on they call her the Black Queen, and it's like, now you're calling her the Black Queen? When did she become the Black Queen? Yeah,
she did it, but she's better as the Great Tyrant. And again, like, she's an interesting character. Like, she's basically like, oh yes, I go out amongst my people as an assassin with an eye patch and knives to kill them.
Yeah, in disguise.
Yeah.
But in disguise as a murderous, you know, insane person.
Yeah, which I was like, that again, it's quite dark, but that's actually really cool. You know, another cool idea that gives into this idea that this city, it you know, in order to live here, you have to buy into all of your vices, all of the evil. Like, you know, it's there, and all of that is on display, but never gratuitous. You know,
and I think. In this scene, this is another scene where it's like, oh, I feel like this is hitting its stride when they're introduced to the Great Tyrant. And, you know, first of all, you start meeting another class of people, and they have like 3 spikes of hair on their head, tubes of hair. Like, again, like they've just gone crazy with the dress, crazy with the hairstyles, the costuming, and they bring Barbarella in to meet the Great Tyrant, and it's in this like weird, like kind of like inside a whale-shaped room with like these ribs that are, and it's like, who designed this? It's so trippy and mind-blowingly, beautiful and weird. And then the Great Tyrant, not only does she not have an eye patch anymore, but she's got a translucent spike on her head. It's like, did Lady Gaga design this?
That's what I was. It's so funny you say that, because I was watching it, because she's got this black sort of like lace and feather and all kind of stuff, this dress. And then she's like I say, she's got very long black hair. She's a very beautiful woman, but then there's like huge unicorn horn thing going on. And I did think like, Lady Gaga's watched Barbarella. Like, there's something more to this. But that I was fascinated to see. It is a crown in some respect, because it comes up again later. But I was like looking at her head, going like, how does that attach? Like, again, this is really well done. Like, the hair and makeup and stuff and costuming in this film is incredible. But yeah, like you say, some of the scenes are just great. The sets are great. I can imagine someone's like, they've done their design and they've done the drawing, and then they've handed it to the sort of set builders, and they've gone, there you go. And someone's just gone, oh shit.
Yeah, it's like they realize at some point, oh, they just want us to go crazy here. Let's really go for it. Yeah. I mean, I feel like, I guess that horn is like the symbolic phallus. But again, like, there's a woman in charge. Nobody says anything about like, oh, the Great Tyrant is a woman. That's not a thing. Nobody says one word about it. It's, nobody ever thinks about it. But then the other thing is like, the dialogue becomes strange. And one of the things I love about the city, I've already said, is like, how does this culture work? And you get like hints with the suicide room, and the tyrant going down to murder her people. Like, there's all these weird aspects. But the tyrant, calls Barbarella pretty. Never says, and then so Barbarella then grabs the gun, which is out of energy, and holds the Great Tyrant hostage. And so the Great Tyrant has just said, like, oh, you're feeling the effects of Mathmos already. Then Barbarella grabs the gun and threatens to melt the Great Tyrant's face. And it's like, and then the Great Tyrant says, like, she's just insanely concerned for, like, oh, not my face. I mean, none of this makes any sense, but it's like, it's so wonderful to me, like, in just this compact few lines. Finding myself wondering, like, is the Mathmos affecting Barbarella? How much does that affect the entire plot going forward? And also, like, the Great Tyrant being concerned for her face, like, does that mean she's obsessed with beauty? What does that mean? Like, I mean, if she's shot in the head, she's probably going to die. Why are you concerned about the effect of your face as you die? Like, is that part of the culture here? What's going on with that? It's so weird, but in a really lovely way.
Yes, no, I agree with that. I love the way she says what she calls it. She calls Barbarella pretty, because it's so creepy and sinister. Like, and it's almost it reminds you again sort of just sort of, she's taken a liking to Barbarella for different reasons. Like, she's obviously, like I say, Jane Fonda's incredibly beautiful, but also the fact she stood up for her and just walked off. And so there's almost like an admiration and a respect there. And she's almost like, well, no, I'm going to have you. You are, you are something special in this place. And I like that. But I also like that they want to, there's a need to corrupt what they see as innocence and that sort of thing. So that's why she's so, to have that thing of saying, like, pretty, it's because to say something's pretty is very nice, but the way she says it is that sort of, it's where the seediness comes in. But like you say, Pie Guy has been taken, and when he's reintroduced, he has been crucified with nails through his wings, and he's hanging up on a metal sort of like structure. And you're sort of, I was like, okay, this is, now you're in sort of, this city, and it is evil. Like, they have got no qualms about torturing people and all this other stuff. it's gone in a very different direction. And this is where we sort of when I come to the humor in it, when I come to some of the stuff that gets humorous later on, it's when this tone starts to sort of feel a little uneven for parts. But I do like this bit. I have to admit, this is a part I do like because it's interesting. It is fascinating. But it's just still this thing of sort of like, I'm not sure what's going on. The thing is, I remember watching this film, I'll be honest with you, I didn't check my watch other than the very beginning of the film. It's about 10 minutes, 20 minutes in when I'm like, okay, it's only going 20 minutes. And then the only time I ever checked it again, and it was like 90 minutes. And I'm like, there's only 8 minutes left of this film. How is this going to end? Like, I don't know where this is going. Right up until the end, I didn't know where this was going. And like you say, when she's now met the Great Tyrant, she's now met, Pygar's now been crucified. A hell of a lot of stuff happened. And I've still got no bead on what the hell is happening with Duran.
Yeah, you've never, well, you find out later you have met him, but nobody knows that he's not introduced. I mean, yeah, it's very weird. Yeah, I mean, that crucifixion image is so striking, and there's blood on his white, that beautiful, we both like those white angel wings. They're spattered with blood, and I feel like we're like in a Jodorowsky movie all of a sudden. Like, yes. This is crazy. Yeah.
Well, like I say, the Great Tyrant sort of, you talk about the beauty and stuff, and she acknowledges he's blind. And at one point, she has him sort of pinned to the floor, and she mounts him and sort of forces his hands to caress her. And she says basically, like, if you weren't blind, you would see how ravishing I am, how beautiful I am, or something. And there is that obsession of sort of like, she clearly knows there's a connection there with Barbarella. So is it jealousy? Does she want this angel to, to see her as beautiful and this other stuff? And so again, I find that sort of, what's driving the tyrant, the Great Tyrant, and her sort of behaviors. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I forgot that about, I remembered that there's this attempted seduction scene of Pygar. But, I mean, that seems to play into the, oh my God, don't melt my face kind of weird reaction. One thing that is clear is that not only in controlling as the tyrant, but also in being so concerned for your beauty and appearance, she represents a kind of like ego. And, the beauty thing might be a feminine ego. The conquest thing we could say is at least a traditionally masculine ego. But she clearly represents a kind of like, egotistical force in contrast with Barbarella's overwhelming innocence. And I think it's, it's only through these contrasts that I realize, like, Barbarella does not care that she's attractive. No. Other people say she's beautiful. She clearly, like, she knows other people think this, but she doesn't, she's not concerned with looking pretty. No. She wears awesome outfits, but she doesn't seem to be wearing them in an attempt to seduce. She thinks they're cool, like she's never, I don't know. It's amazing to me that you have this female character who, if this were a male character, first of all, every challenge, instead of saying like, oh, let's do this, these male characters would say, oh, we've got to soldier on. Don't give up. You've got it, and they'd phrase it in this way. She just deals with it with this unfailing, innocent grace. And in the same way, seems utterly unconcerned by whether other people think she's attractive.
Yeah, no, that's again, it comes down to this thing of like, she as a character is interesting, but like you said, like, the fact she's a woman never gets addressed. It's never an issue. The fact that she's a warrior is never really a bother. Like, she herself is just herself. She's so comfortable with herself of being just herself that, like, whether she's considered attractive or not, or whether she's considered brave or not, doesn't bother her. She's just like, well, I'm just me, and I'm here to do this mission, and I'm going to sort of do it, and that's all there is to it. Like, it's just, it feels straightforward, but it's not. There's more to it, but it's a confidence. It's just self-confidence. Like, she's just completely comfortable with who she is. even when cause after this scene, she escapes or she's saved, but she goes, she's saved by the rebels. Oh no, because firstly, there's a torture, there's a death, and yeah, she's going to be executed by one of the weirdest scenes. Which I've seen Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. I've seen how you can make birds creepy and sort of unsettling. This isn't it.
Yeah. No, this is not one of the better scenes. But I love, like, again, they're like, okay, we're gonna like execute you, right? We're gonna do something terrible to you, and then they go into another room, and you're like, the first thing you see are like these Egyptian kind of like sculptures of like bird heads, and you're like, there's two of them, and you're like, what are these attached to? Like, what am I seeing? And it turns out that they're both like, why again? Like, there were, I mean, it's so weird. Okay, so I mean, there are these twins outside of the city, right? Then the flying crafts have the two twin cockpits. Here's this like bird cage thing. There's one cage underneath, but it has like two sort of like oval areas that each have a separate. There's this weird kind of doubling thing going on.
Yes,
it's still. I don't know what to make of it, man. But this turned out to be just like a cage, and apparently, when they shot this, they shot this for a while, and they had to get these birds, and they like you can kind of see like they put a fan in the floor, and they covered Jane Fonda in birdseed, and just put this fan just like slamming the birds around in a frenzy, and are just like, yeah, let's just do this for hours a day over and over again. And like the birds were shitting on her, it's just, this was not well executed.
It's that thing of like, if they've got that much footage, yet this is what they chose to use. I mean, it's funny because they come out, and at first I was like, because I mean, I wouldn't want to be in there. It is quite a weird, horrible situation. So she's in this thing, and tens of birds, budgerigars. Let's not even say birds; they're budgies. Come out, and they're all flying around. They're all multicolored. There's some wonderful colors. There's blues and yellows and greens, and it's great. And then she's up like, and it's all like, then they'll show bits of her costume being ripped, and there's some sort of fake blood on there. But all I'm seeing is she's then lying on the floor panicking, and just a row of budgies are sat on her leg. And I'm like, I can't get the past. This looks awful. It looks dreadful, because those budgies are just like, yeah, I'm done with this. I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to enjoy whatever's going on. But
they're perching on her.
Yeah, they literally just sat in a row along her leg, and she's trying to act and stuff. And it's just sort of like, yeah, this wasn't a great choice. But what I would say is, again, this is a different era. So, because I'm pretty sure Peter would have been involved at some point with this. She's saved because the floor gives way. She goes down a tube, and she's taken away. But then they cut to a scene of her coming out the bottom of the tube, and she's still covered in birds. And she lands. And she lands on at least two of them, and one of them flies away. And all I'm thinking is like, one of those birds just got battered.
Yeah.
So, but like, I think you see it sort of it sat on the bed after, so I'm like, okay, maybe it's fine. But I was still like, yeah, they stuck with the guns on that one. They really wanted you to know the birds were part of this.
And it's the weirdest way to execute somebody. Like, with these tiny little birds to attack. I mean, it's so bizarre. But, I dig how bizarre it is. You're right. I mean, like, and the other thing is like the cutting is like a cut of a more Hitchcocky kind of like they're trying to get there, and there's just like there's a fan just blowing these birds around, and then you cut to them just perching, and it doesn't seem like there's any commotion going on in that shot, and then right back to the birds going around, as she screams. But then she slides through this floor, and then she emerges at the bottom, and and you're like, okay, this is weird. Obviously, it's an attempt to get her out of this escape, right? But then this tube is another like weird translucent tube. And as soon as she lands, we're introduced to another character. We have not seen Duran Duran yet. We're introduced to another character, and right away he asks for a password. And you're like, what's going on? Yeah. I mean, I just feel like my brain is exploding. Like, this is so weird.
Well, one of my thoughts about this point, this saving of her going into that cage and being attacked by the birds, and then the way she is saved, which is so sort of like out of nowhere, you've been given no indication that there's a fall away floor or anything. It's so smacked of Batman 66. Like, I could imagine sort of like Barbarella being in there and that being the end of the episode. You know, how will Barbarella escape from this tragedy now? Will she escape the Cape Canary? And, you know, and then coming back next episode, the fourth goes away and they're saved. Like, it feels, I mean, it's very in keeping with the same tone, isn't it? That sort of kitschy sort of 60s silly vibe. But it felt very Adam West at this point.
Yeah, so, one thing I do dig about it is the, you know, these different episodes. Like, that is a whole episode of, you know, sort of her being taken to the bird room, and, you know, and it doesn't go on very long, partly because they don't have good bird footage. But, you know, there are other scenes that, like, you know, go on, you know, for a while, and you're like, oh, I mean, some of these episodes are really short, they're really long, you know, and I dig that. I don't know if you've ever read The Adventures of Phoebe Zeitgeist.
No.
It's a weird alternative comic from, like, you know, it was published, I think, by Grove Press in the 60s. And it's like nothing but an episodic thing of, like, an adventure woman who just gets murdered, and, you know, she's in peril at the end of every episode, and then she dies, and then, you know, multiple installments follow her corpse, and then it's reanimated, and, you know, I mean, it's just mad. But there is this sense of, like, you know, the female adventurer in peril, right? Which is a trope of sort of like titillation. But it's always like so imaginative, and I don't know, it's very strange. I don't feel like, obviously it feels more like a sort of, you know, Indiana Jones in peril. The birds are not, at least that episode is not sexual in any way, right?
No. It's very episodic, as you said. I think that's a good point. It is sort of, but it is mad. It is, that's the thing. I kind of like it because of how silly it is, because it feels, again, in tone with everything else that's gone on. You're like, okay, she's going to be eaten by budgerigars. You know, it's not a threat I would ever consider, but someone's clearly thought this is fine. But this next bit is where, again, the tonal shift comes out of nowhere.
Yes. Because
all of a sudden, you are going to get some serious, almost Monty Python-esque humour.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to stop right there. I've got to burst in for a pee, so I'm going to pop, and then we'll carry on. I'll let it out. What is it?
I will keep the headphones in and smoke a little.
Okay. Right. Back whenever you're at.
Yeah, just 1 minute. Okay.
Cool.
Monty Python-esque.
Yes. So she meets these rebels, or she meets the sort of leader of the rebel sort of thing, and he, you know, they depict him in a different way. He's wearing sort of leather and chains, and not S&M kind of way, but he's got a different style of costume to everyone else in the city. But all of a sudden, he is the leader, or the sort of a big part of this rebel force that's trying to overthrow the city and the Great Tyrant. You learn that, and that's great. Interesting that there's going to be the resistance to that kind of thing. But then all of a sudden, there's a whole series of jokes about an invisible key that goes into a room with an invisible wall. and then she ends up sleeping with him again, but it's like he doesn't want to do the physical thing. He wants to do the drug and the psycho sex thing, and you get this whole scene of them doing that, where to show how exciting it is, like they've got like their hair flying up, and Barbarella's hair changes hairstyle like several times, and all sorts of. And someone comes, and then some of the dude comes in, and he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry for interrupting." It's a very different. It's an episode, but the tone and humor is just, it's very different.
Yeah, I mean, it almost seems like picaresque, like, you know, it's a different kind of episodic, story. Yeah, I do love the, it kind of all starts with, she kind of wants to reward him for saving her again. So it's like, oh, this is a repeat of the, Sean Connery dude. And, and then I love what he says, she's like, okay. And she just lays back like, all right, well, we're going to do this again. And, and then he's like, oh my God, no, he says, I want that pill. Did you bring one of those pills? And he's so like, he lives in this evil place where they're like torture. There's people hanging and, like being murdered. And, there's a suicide room. And he's like, I want to try one of those pills, and he says, what he says is like, I'm not a savage. He's so offended that somebody would suggest physical sex. And I love that they don't just repeat the Sean Connery bit, but I also love, like, here's this dude in this like completely evil society that has all these eccentric things. And what he wants is to be civilized. He aspires to like being so civilized that you use a pill. But then, as you say, I mean, there's this comedic sort of like psychic Vulcan sex scene. And then through the rest of the picture, almost, this revolutionary leader is sort of depicted as pretty incompetent.
Yes. He's goofy. He's like a goofy sort of character, isn't he? I mean, incompetent is probably the way to describe it. I mean, I do like the sort of sex scene is funny. Like, they have their hands together and sort of like say it's sort of smoke starts coming out, and they've obviously got an underfan sort of blowing their hair up and all this other stuff. It is quite funny. And again, this is one of the things I would say that sort of to me suggests it was done in a linear fashion, because they sort of got to this point and gone, do you know what would be funny? Do you know what would be really good right about now? And the whole thing though, that psycho sex scene is interesting, and it's a bit silly, but it's this whole thing with the invisible key that felt that would be at home in sort of like Life of Brian or Holy Grail or one of those ones, because he brings up he sort of brings up this box, and it's sort of like, oh, look at this, but he opens it and it's just a cushion with nothing on it. She's like, where is it? He's like, well, it's invisible, isn't it? It's an invisible key for an invisible wall. And then sort of like, she's like, it's not there. And he runs off to find it on a board full of other keys. And then he finds it and holds it, and it's on an invisible chain as well to go around her neck. And it's almost like, I'm like, this is absurd. Like, this is like, it's quite funny, but not laugh out loud funny. But I'm like, this doesn't seem to fit with the rest of the film.
Oh, I agree. And they spent like a good minute just miming this invisible key. And I feel like, how is this going on this long? It's not really working, and it's not in tone with anything. Yeah.
Well, again, it comes back to it, because eventually, like, he communicates with the people in the labyrinth. Like, that's the sort of point. They're like part of the resistance, Professor Ping and all this other stuff. Like, you find out he's been fixing Barbarella's ship, and Pygar is there, and blah blah blah. And when he's doing it, like, he's got to sort of go into this frequency so he can talk to them, and then starts broadcasting some music, and you have this moment of sort of like silliness of them trying to sort of turn off this radio so they're not found out, and eventually Barbarella just leans in and turns it off. Like, it's like you say, as the resistance, they're not depicted as a sort of like a competent resistance at all.
No, and I mean, I think the resistance is one of my least favorite aspects of the city. And one of the things that irritates me is, like, they say, oh, this is a secret tube from the bird execution room. How the fuck did you install this tube? You know, like they've got tubes through the whole city. It's like, you know, the Great Tyrant isn't aware of your tube system, you know, and I get it. Like we're off the rails already, you know, and I don't know why I'm not willing to go along with that. And I'm willing to go along with, you know, a blind angel out of nowhere and, you know, so much other weird stuff. But then, you know, and even more just like out of sync moment for me is when he's making that radio call to the resistance in the labyrinth. He says, Professor Ping to headquarters, Professor Ping to headquarters. And, you know, Barbarella, you know, like nudges him and says, you know, he's like, oh, headquarters to Professor Ping. It's like he's dazed after the sex and he like the Vulcan sex and he doesn't, you know, it's like he's just a goofy dude. And then when you see Professor Ping, there's like a guy in mud next to him. Like that's a mud man next to him. And it's like, was that cut from earlier? Like, I don't remember Mudman.
We're just back we're back in the labyrinth. Weird characters abundance. That's what it is.
And then one thing I do love. So, I mean, it oscillates from like stuff where I'm like, yeah, you know, like how do you have the secret tunnels? You know, like, you know, this seems over the top silly with, you know, with the key that's a little later, but, you know, with a sort of Professor Ping the headquarters error. You know, it's more weird than funny. But then he says, oh, the password is, and it's this absurdly long alien word. And Barbarella repeats it as if she knows that word. And
do you know what that word is? It's not an alien word at all. Well, it possibly is. Do you know what that word is? It's the name it's the name of a train station.
Is it really?
It's the longest word in the Welsh language.
Oh, God.
That's what it is. That's what it is. And so when he said it, I was sat there with Alex, and the both of us sort of stopped and looked at each other and were like, "I'm not going to say it because I can't say it." But it ends with "goch goch goch," which is, it's the name of a Welsh train station. It's the longest word in the Welsh language, and I think it's got something like 28 letters in it or something like that.
It's so bizarre. That's such a weird reference.
Yeah, it is. So, I wondered, and because it's this thing of like she's from Earth. So I wondered if it was supposed to be like, oh, she's from Earth. Of course, she would know this really small Welsh train station or village. So I got that reference, but even I was like, that's a 1968, a sort of like, you know, American film based on a French comic referencing the Welsh language. Fair enough.
Right, with all these French people filming it in Cinecittà in Italy. You know, like how are they? Yeah, thanks for that. I did not know that. It reminds me of like the Hawaiian state bird, which is like you know, humu humu nuku nuku apu aa, where it's like you have to print like the state bird and it's the longest, you know, no, it's a state fish. It's the longest, you know, it's like state animal, you know. How do you print that? It's like the train station sign is so long.
I will send you a photo of that thing. But yeah, I thought it was a weird little thing. And like you say, it's a joke. And a thing like if you get it, you get it. You don't, you don't. They don't care. But it seems like so out of sync with everything else that's going on. Because then like they sort of drop that. And then it goes back to, because she's then got to escape, because she's got to get to the Great Tyrant, who is in her sleeping chamber.
Right, this is what the invisible key thing is, right? She's got this chamber of dreams that's behind the invisible wall. Somehow, you know, like, okay, a chamber of dreams, somehow she needs this. And it seems like it's connected to that, you know.
To Mathmos.
To Mathmos. And, so like she's now on an errand for the revolutionaries. Where's Duran Duran? Like, you know, she's like, they mention him. And she's like, okay, now my mission is to like overthrow the Great Tyrant. And by the way, I'll also find Duran Duran and like stop this.
Yeah,
right.
We'll pick that up later. It just so happens to coincide because this is where you get the essence of man. Because she's trying to hide, and the concierge is chasing her down, and she sort of sees all these things, and she seems to enjoy it as well. She takes a breath of it, or like a huff on it, and she's like, "Yeah, it's not bad." But this is the reveal, isn't it? She gets taken, and she by the concierge, and she's sort of sedated, and she wakes up and she's in this sort of what is basically like a piano organ. Is the only she's sort of fixed inside an organ thing, and he's going to torture her. And this is where I think this whole point of physical sensation sort of comes to its head. It's like she's learned to sort of to experience things physically. And so she breaks this machine because he tries to give her sort of the ultimate. It starts with pleasure and then goes into pain, but she just experiences all of it, and the machine can't handle it. I don't know. Yeah. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that is certainly a key scene. I mean, you know, just to back up for a second, you know, with that intermediate scene with I love, again, that set. Like, and you've got a bald woman among the, you know, essence of man smokers, and this guy in the flask, and, you know, like, oh, there's an opium den, you know, in the city, like, you know, oh, it's so awesome. But then, you know, the concierge takes her away. And yeah, I mean, this like the excessive machine. I mean, I think this is, you know, not necessarily problematic, but this is certainly one of the like sort of touchstones of this movie's presentation of sexuality. And you know, it feels, again, like, I mean, I think this movie is so visionary. It feels like something out of like Ken Russell's Listomania or something. Like, I mean, it's just so bizarre. And the machine, you see it like spitting out her clothes. And, you know, I love that, like, Duran Duran is playing it like an organ, and it's a cool design. Like, it goes in waves, you know, there are these keys that sort of wave over her, and it starts pleasure. But, you know, he says, when you reach the crescendo, you will die of pleasure. And she's sweaty, and, you know, then the machine smokes and catches fire, and she's broken it. And he's very mad. So yeah, I mean, first of all, you know, it's kind of charming. It's a clever crazy. It's another clever crazy thing, but so I don't know. I mean, I think that it feels to me like, you know, like she has a kind of strength in her ability to embrace her own sexuality and her own pleasure. That this is a place that has shame. She does not have shame. And that somehow, again, like symbolically gives her strength. I think there's like in Duran Duran, there's this male desire to perform, like, you know, to give her all this pleasure so much it's going to kill her. And this, you know, again, you know, it's sort of like the connection between pleasure and pain here is really interesting, especially with the BDSM elements. And then this male desire, you know, to control, to perform, to control her sexuality, to control, you know, both her pleasure and her pain, and also the way in which that often crosses over to sort of violence, if not homicidal impulses, that this desire to perform sexually and give a woman pleasure is often tied to controlling female bodies and inflicting violence upon them. And I think that's really resonant for me as well.
That's
what do you think?
No, I just thought it was weird. No, you're right. I hadn't thought about that, but they say because his irritation at the end of, like, you know, because again it's filmed in an entertaining way, like you say. You see her sort of experiencing it, and she's obviously, you know, she's having the extensive pleasure, reaching orgasm, and the show is all sweaty and sort of that sort of thing. It's clear that, you know, shows you what's going on, and then when it starts to smoke and flame, like, yeah, he is outraged. Like, you know, how dare you, you know, basically not do what you're told and beat me at this. And it's at that point, really, when she figures out that the concierge is Duran Duran. And there's a couple of things, actually, which I find interesting. In that point is, because, again, she sort of almost insults him, but not quite, is throughout this point, you've been told that Duran Duran is a young man. You know, he's 25 to 30 sort of thing, so he's quite young. And the concierge he's a guy in his sort of, like, you know, obviously late 40s or 50s or whatever. And she sort of calls him on it. She's like, you're not the young man I was expecting. And basically his excuse is sort of like, yeah, well, living here sort of comes with its sacrifices. You know, you sort of got to do these things. And it's almost like, yeah, living in this world of vice really does burn you out. But yeah, it's almost like you say, this thing of he's lived in this world of vice and evil and everything, and it's this need for control. Again, it comes to this need to control Barbarella. Like you had the great tyrant has wanted to do it, and now sort of he's trying to do it. And like I say, it just her naivety and her innocence, of all that is sort of just is what keeps to keep protecting her from these things. Because he lets her out basically, sort of like because she confronts him about the weapon and stuff. And it's an interesting moment, but it allows it goes on to him to then basically to sort of like almost sort of this whole thing sort of pushes his plan forward because he's like you can't take on he's like I can't take out the great tyrant. The only time you could do it is when she's not when she's not surrounded by guards. The only time she's not surrounded by guards is in her dream chamber. And so that's when sort of like for some reason, again, she just basically gives up this information of like, well, I could sort of let you into that then, and so we could help overthrow it. It sort of it gets a little convoluted, but she almost has to trick her way out of that machine, and she's obviously gets another costume change, and then they go off to the dream chamber, and so yeah, but he is now sort of like he's Duran Duran, he's sort of like he now the big bad. There was something about the way he played it. Up until this point, he's been very much almost like subservient. He's been sort of like, almost like a caretaker of the whole thing, sort of like working subservient for the Great Tyrant. And he sort of swings now to becoming like arch villain. So it becomes very sort of, scene chewing and stuff like that. And I don't know if that's a choice or whatever. But it doesn't fully work for me. But it's that tone thing of like, they're just going all out and there's that excess. And so when he becomes the sort of, when you realize he's Duran Duran and he actually is now the main villain, it's I don't know, if it had been held back a bit more and sort of and maintained on that concierge kind of thing, I think I like that bit better because he comes across a bit sort of again, 1966 Batman-ish at times. But again, the concepts are cool because they do go to the dream chamber and there's the joke of, she walks into a glass pane and that's the invisible wall. And, it's fine. But again, all I can think of is like, you haven't seen a glass window before? So, yeah, we're sort of reaching the end now.
Yeah. Well, let me just go back and make a few points. Talking about Duran Duran's or the concierge's rage at the sudden rage of the machine, right? Being destroyed. And, he says out of the blue, have you no shame? And, nobody's mentioned shame. There's no shame in this universe before that. And as you say, like he seems enraged. And it is shocking to me, like this sudden tone, again, like another tonal shift, but and it seems to me like you've kidnapped her, you've put her in this machine where she experienced sexual pleasure, and then you're angry with her. Like it's such a like classic sort of misogynist sort of trope, right? Like, guys having sex with girls and then saying like, well, you're a slut, aren't you? It's like, well, I did what you wanted, like, why are you mad at me? But here, I mean, it's like you've kidnapped her and then you're angry with her. I don't know. It seems, I love that. It seems so resonant. But then I was also thinking like, that you said it was like convoluted, and you're right. I mean, the way she just is like, I've got an invisible key for that. But I kind of dig how like, I mean, he's enraged. She gets out of the machine and like she's able to kind of pivot and collaborate with him. So like they shift into a collaboration. And I think it's cool that like he's just tried to kill her, but she's again through that kind of like innocence, this thing that she has, she's able to somehow get this guy who's just killed her to collaborate with her So they're like, well, we have a mutual interest. I'll figure out what to do about you later, and your weapon. But right now, let's work together to get rid of the Great Tyrant. I don't know. It seems like a female collaboration versus male conflict. But yeah, I mean, that the dream chamber. I mean, yeah, it's silly, and they have, they have the water ripple that seems to indicate when that is that the wall that's being touched, that causes this. I don't know what that water ripple is, but the set is amazing. I mean, with the rotating things and these fibrous white things, and then the bed that the queen is sleeping on is like a golden sculpture of a woman reclining with its head replaced by a pod, that your pillow goes under. It's beautiful. It's crazy. And it looks like it belongs in the Milk Bar in Clockwork Orange.
Yeah, no, the set down again is ace, and it's one of those things that sort of, like you say, they've gone mad, and because it then turns out the bed's also got remote controls and stuff in it, and all kinds of bits and pieces. But they've just gone all out, because there's fibrous things, like this big sort of fiber optic, this sort of grass, tufts of sort of plastic grass or whatever, sort of dotted around, because the whole thing's black. We should say that the entire black background and the floor is all black, so it's clearly like a soundstage. But then they've just put this stuff on it and placed it and stuff, and it just looks it's very, very effective. I mean, obviously, I watched this. I was watching this in HD, and it looks, for the most part, incredible. But yeah, like you say, the design work is good. It's only when they sort of try and get into the real story nuggets that it sort of starts to sort of fall apart a bit. Because again,
it's surreal, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, it is, because again, when you find it, when she sort of confronts the Great Tyrant about why she has to be in here alone, because that's one of the rules. The Great Tyrant has to be in the Dream Chamber alone, and it's something to do with Mathmos. But nobody knows why. It's sort of like, oh no, Mathmos is, I've got to be in here. My dreams fuel it. Oh, all right. Well, are your dreams purely evil then? Is that part of it? Is that why you can rule? I don't know.
I don't know either. But it's cool, I mean, it doesn't make sense.
No,
but it's evocative, I mean, yeah, it's kind of, I mean, I get that it's a joke, the invisible wall and the invisible key, yada, yada, yada. But, I mean, I love that set, and I love the idea of it's so fairy tale, right? There's a queen who's a tyrant, and she's got to retreat to this secret chamber that nobody else can be in, where she's somehow refueled by the evil alien liquid entity that lives under. That's so just evocative and rich and awesome.
Yeah, it is, and I can see that there's so much that they could explore. And again, I do kind of like the fact that she doesn't know. There's no, because if this was a modern film, there'd be a 5-minute exploratory exposition scene of why Mathmos is the way it is, and why she's got to be in this scene or something. But there's just a case of she's I don't know, it's just the way it is. This is the way it works, and I've got to be here. And even Barbarella's all right, it doesn't matter. It's not important to the plot. It's just part and parcel of it. And
Barbarella just accepts everything, right? I mean, that's part of her innocent character, but it's also let's keep this plot going.
Yeah, keep moving. Let's not think about it too much. Keep rolling. But it then moves on to this fact that, like you say, that she's then in the bed. She's a remote controls, and so she's got these one-way cameras and things, which allows her to see what's going on in the rest of the city, I assume.
Well, first we should say that there's another twist besides the concierge being Duran Duran, that, she's collaborating with Duran Duran to get into this chamber. She goes into the chamber. Duran Duran goes in after her, grabs the invisible key that they use to go into the chamber, and grabs the original, right, the one that the queen has, and then locks them in. So now they're stuck together in this room that, there's no escape from. And so that's when she's like, oh, I have this camera system rigged up into this like weird statue sex bed thing, you know?
Yeah, and they've been in there for probably less than 3 minutes.
Uh-huh.
So Barbarella sort of has, she's running around. She's tried the walls. Then she wakes up the great tyrant to sort of say, we're doing this, and there's this whole little conversation. They find the remotes, and what's going on? The concierge is being crowned as the new tyrant. And I'm thinking, that was quick. That was
he had that one ready.
Yes. But if you notice, the crown that he's having put on his head has got that translucent horn thing again. So it's that sign of rule in some way. And he's got himself
the Lacanian phallus.
He does. But he's got himself a new set of clothes, and it was set up ready to go. But in this city of evil, I'm pretty sure the residents were a bit like, all right, someone is in charge. I don't care. Do I still get to smoke Essence of Man? Yes, you do. All right, well, I'm all on board. I'm fine with that.
Not ready to go into the suicide room yet.
Yes, yeah. We'll see how it pans out. The one thing I would say that we haven't mentioned actually is the Great Tyrant's guards, and she has them dotted around, and they've appeared throughout. They appear with your Sean Connery looking dude at the beginning as well, and they're called the Leathermen, and which in itself, like, they are literally head to foot, like they are made of a leathery type material. And they have one hand is a big whip, but when you shoot them, they explode, and there's nothing inside. Like,
are they? They're not really robots, but they're artificial constructs somehow, right?
Yep, never explained. But I do like that idea again. Like, they're called the Leathermen, and they have these whips and stuff. And it's again, I'm like, all right, I'm sticking with this. It sort of fits into the tone. But I love that as an idea, that they are just some sort of like automaton that's literally just made up of a shell. And it makes, I mean, they're the stormtroopers, right? I mean, yeah. I do love their design. They look kind of like knights, they have like this, knight look to their head. And then they have that whip, I mean, which is obviously suggestive. But also like, here is control, right? And I don't know what to make of it. Like, they're soulless. I mean, obviously that justifies killing them, which is a problem in Star Wars, right? But here they're literally sort of automatons. But I don't know. I mean, there are these instruments of the larger sort of like BDSM kind of control culture of that city. And then, then we have the Duran having seized control is using his weapon and just starts massacring. You see, like, the revolution is coming up, and it's just and then he's just like, oh, screw that, and he straps himself again. Like, the design is amazing. He straps himself into like the control pod. It's like a chair, but with like this helmet thing that like you sit Cerebro. It looks like Cerebro.
Yeah, no, I dig it, but it's like a red Cerebro like grafted into a chair, man. Like I dig it so much, but then he's like zapping them, and they just like disappear, and he kills the leader of the revolution. Like, Dano, he's dead.
Yeah, this is the bit I find that's interesting. Is you've made the comparisons to Flash Gordon, and this is the moment of the Hawkmen and the tree people sort of attacking Ming the Merciless. You've got the dun 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 Flash, all that going on. It's sort of like it's you're getting your pulse up. It's an attack, and you get to see some people fighting on starships and that sort of thing. Like, that's almost where I was going. Oh, we're going to get some fighting. Nope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nope. This isn't that film. They are literally just going to be massacred. Like, he's sat in this machine with this like what looks like a big, massive laser Gatling gun, and just starts to wipe them out.
Like, and I love the design of the gun. I wish they had more pathos of those guys dying. Like in this movie that goes for it. why not show those guys, like in agony, just like the massacre, like bring home the fact that like we're witnessing a massacre. Like we're watching, like if this is Star Wars, we're watching the rebels die. They're all dead. And literally they're all dead. Nobody is attacking the city who is not wiped out. Like the professor's back down at the base. He's okay. But everybody who attacks the city is all just vaporized.
Yeah. Oh, he wipes them out. He wipes them out. And I was watching it. I was a bit like, well, that was a choice. Like that scene was incredible. That's not, a typical choice. Even for the 60s, that you'd expect to have like the hero resistance rise up against that sort of authoritarian figure and have that win. No, doesn't happen. And so whilst that's going on, though, one of the weird things is like is the great tyrant and Barbarella have this sort of escape pod, and they actually escape into the Mathmos from the sleep chamber, and then they are literally ejected from Mathmos. And they come across Pygar, and they find that Pygar's there, and that's when you said before, like say, she is ejected from it because the Mathmos cannot digest her because of her innocence, and it seems the same seems to be true for Pygar, and you see the city behind, like it's overloaded. There's I'm not sure if the gun overloads or something happens, but the city explodes. Like Mathmos turns on them and starts to attack.
Yeah, I mean, I dig that like the revolution fails, like the sort of like masculine, we're gonna beat you, again, doesn't work. How they win is like the Great Tyrant, is locked in this room. All the rebels are dead, right? Duran has won, and the Great Tyrant, just says, well, there's nothing left to do but to free the Mathmos. So somehow in that room that like she communes with the Mathmos, and there's all this rear projection of like weird stuff that I dig. She can like sort of unleash this Mathmos thing, and which really ends up meaning like it'll explode, right? I mean, and destroy the city. So that's the ultimate trump card. And so that like escape pod is their bed, is her bed. And the only explanation for this is, I mean, this is not, the only explanation is that Mathmos has created a bubble to protect itself from Barbarella's innocence. So Mathmos is like, I need to protect myself from Barbarella. I better put a pod. I better put like a bubble around that sleeping woman, statue to protect the Great Tyrant, who happens to be next to Barbarella. And that's how they survive, as opposed to Mathmos being like, well, I'll just consume her. Into myself, but I guess it feeds on emotion. I mean, so they're kind of like ejected.
Yeah, it's supposed to feel negative, isn't it? Sort of, it's supposed to feel a negative energy and sort of, those vibes. And so that's what that is. Yeah, it's almost like she is venom to the Mathmos. Like, taking that on would almost be like a poison to it. Like it. And you go back to the point you made before about when she grabs the Great Tyrant and threatens to shoot her in the face, and she's like, "Oh, the Mathmos is having an effect on you." Well, for the rest of the film, she remains innocent and she remains courageous and brave and true and all that kind of stuff. So maybe it is like the Mathmos is like, I can't affect this person, like I can't corrupt her, and so ingesting her would actually be poison to me, and because it's also ejected Pygar. It's rejected him. It can't ingest him. So that's lucky.
Well, I mean,
but yeah,
this thing about her innocence, like I keep thinking about how like the collaborative way that the non-zero sum way that she deals with these things, right? So, I mean, even confronted by Duran, she's like, okay, you just tried to kill me. I'll collaborate with you to get rid of the Great Tyrant. We have a mutual enemy. There's no hostility. She diffuses his anger, his rage so easily, by working with him. And then now she's working with the Great Tyrant, she's like, okay, well, and so this revolution, this force of like this male force of military arms, right? We're going to storm the castle. We're going to, the revolution's going to kill the king, just fails, just is annihilated by superior technology, as it would be. Thank you, George Lucas. And but then the solution is to free the Mathmos. Again, like free, I don't know why it's caged somehow. I guess the implication is that it's been caged and controlled somehow. But, symbolically, like, she's not fighting.
No.
She's working with the Great Tyrant, working with their enemy to free this, like, weirdly powerful alien force. And that's the solution. Like, this is some kind of, like, weird non-zero sum collaborative, international policy stuff. And I really dig that.
Yeah, no, it's true, actually, because, again, it's talking about it now, the one thought that comes to my head is, because it almost feels like a Doctor Who kind of thing, isn't it? That sort of thing of a trapped entity that is eventually sort of revealed to be trapped, and then they free it, and it supports their goal in some way. And I just think that sort of is fascinating to me, that's sort of the way it goes. But yeah, it's just this sort of this awesome. This awesome sort of, like you say, non-confrontational, non-masculine sort of way of dealing with things. I've just had a warning: this recording is going to finish in 5 minutes because we're up to the 2-hour mark. But yeah, so
wow.
Yeah, so you get this sort of non-confrontational way of looking at it, and that's the end. I mean, they literally the end of the film is them flying away, like they saved the Great Tyrant. Pygar and Barbarella and the Great Tyrant fly away.
Well, I mean, a few things that I like here, and you're right, it is kind of quick. Pygar is injured, having been ejected, and the Great Tyrant says, "Oh, like try mouth to mouth." And there's this great scene where she like pumps his chest by pumping his wings.
Yes,
and it's so beautiful. And then Pygar revives. He's flying them out of there. We never see anyone else again. They're just flying out. And then there are these weird evocative lines, right? We've heard an angel's love, right? The angel doesn't love, he is love. And, the final line is, Pygar saying, an angel has no memory. Like, he doesn't hold a grudge. He literally has no memory. What does that mean? Like, I think it's like forgiveness, but it's also like, does that mean he clearly remembers her? He remembers like they had sex. I mean,
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a kind of like, it's so evocative to me. It's weird, but beautiful. And I think that it summarizes a lot of what I feel about this film.
No, and I think you're right, because I like this in the 60s films when these things happen, they just sort of end. We said it again with sort of like Quatermass in the Pit last week. It was sort of like, oh, it just sort of ends. This thing doesn't need I would love there to be an epilogue, but it doesn't need one. It just sort of ends on that note, and that's great. And it's sort of, you've had this journey and this experience is what this film is. It's to be experienced rather than to be sort of seen as a film. But let's just, we've literally got a couple of minutes left. So what are your final thoughts then on Barbarella from 1968 Barbarella?
Well, I love this movie. I think the first half is weaker. I think that it is still a positive message. I think it does have a message. I think it is a beautiful, weird, surreal movie. And I think that what it lacks as far as music, compared to like Flash Gordon, it makes up with like just sheer weirdness of set design and crazy ideas and, French surrealism. What are your thoughts?
No, very similar. I think this idea of it being surreal is really important. It is. It's weird, and it's not afraid of being weird as well, which I think is great. The set design, the costumes, some of the choices, and they all work in the best possible way. In the sense of, it's it could be there's some shifts in tone which I don't think work particularly well, but overall it's an experience. Like, they are literally just going to go, we're throwing you in. And you're going to experience some weird shit in this film. And you know what? It's going to be a wild ride. And I'm like, that's cool. This film could not be made today. Or if it did, it would be a mean, darker, gritty version of Barbarella. And you'd be like, no, you don't need that. This is what this film's supposed to be. It was an interesting watch. I'm glad I went back and watched it. I'm not sure I'll go back and watch it again. I might do, but yeah, no, it's been a good watch.
Yeah, I really admire it, and I really enjoy it.
Admiration is definitely that's a good word. Admire it. I do. I have admiration for this film for what it is and what it does. And I'd actually suggest, I mean, literally second left, any of our female listeners, if you've not seen this film and you've listened to us talk about it, like, go back and watch this film, because it's not just titillation. It's actually a really fascinating film. I'd love to hear from a women's perspective, because we are literally just two sort of like bald, white guys still telling this stuff to everyone. Come back and tell us what you think about it.
Tell us where we're wrong.
Exactly. I'd love to hear that perspective. Anyway, literally got second step. So we've done Barbarella. So are we going to go hard hitting, deep diving into sci-fi next week? Hell no. We are doing the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and I make one guarantee: I won't sing.